He threw her out into the freezing cold, pregnant. But what she did next, no one was prepared for. When I first saw her curled up on that frozen porch, my breath caught in my throat because I realized she was still waiting for him. The January wind howled like a restless spirit, and each gust felt like a slap against my face. Icicles hung from the eaves like shattered glass, and her fur was dusted white with frost. I'd heard the neighbor had chased her away just days before, but I never expected to find her lingering at the same doorstep. Her ribs pressed against the rough boards, and every shallow breath she took sent tiny clouds into the air. My heart froze that moment. I locked eyes with her. Those dark pools of sorrow looked right through me, as if she recognized some sorrow in my own soul. Around us, the world was a silent white wasteland, but in her gaze I heard a plea louder than any howl of the wind. I hesitated, torn between stepping closer and fleeing from the raw grief in her eyes. The snow beneath my boots crunched with an accusing finality. Here she was, abandoned and still faithful. My fingers went numb as I reached out, but I stopped, afraid she might bolt or lunge. Instead, she pressed a paw against the porch step, urging someone, anyone, to come back. I remembered the neighbor's words, cold as the morning air. She's nothing but a stray now. Let her fend for herself. I thought at the time he meant it as kindness, that he believed she'd find a new home or wander off into the woods. But as I watched her wait, I realized his cruelty ran deeper than I'd imagined. The wind shifted. Snow swirled in dizzying spirals around us, transforming the yard into a ghostly dance. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. She simply stared, steadfast. It looked almost defiant, like she refused to accept that she no longer belonged there. My chest tightened at her resolve. I wanted to call out, to tell her she was safe now, that I would help her. But the words froze on my tongue. Instead, I knelt and studied her face. There was a gentle intelligence in her expression, a calm that seemed almost holy. I felt a pang of shame, realizing I had judged her owner too harshly for his harshness, without knowing the depth of her loyalty. A single tear slid down my cheek as the wind threatened to freeze it solid. She watched it fall, tilting her head with soft curiosity. In that moment, I sensed something impossible. She understood my sorrow. She knew my silent promise to keep her safe. My pulse thundered so loudly, I was sure she could hear it. I remembered thinking how easy it would have been for her to vanish into the woods, to follow her instincts and find another shelter. Yet here she remained, bloodied paws pressed to wood that belonged to someone who had thrown her out. Why? What bond kept her tethered to that cruel threshold? My heart ached with questions I couldn't answer. I glanced at the neighbor's window, dark, empty. His hearth probably glowed with warmth inside, the sound of his footsteps muffled by walls. She could have gone there, but she chose not to. She chose this frozen loneliness, trusting he might return, hope shimmering in her soul like an ember refusing to die. I caught myself hoping he'd come back too, as if redemption belonged only to him. But then I realized the real miracle was here, in this patient creature who still believed in kindness from the cruel. My knees pressed into the icy ground, and I felt smaller than I'd ever been. "Come here, girl," I whispered, voice cracking. But she didn't budge. Her loyalty held her fast. I swallowed hard, chest tight with emotions I could scarcely name. Sorrow, wonder, fear, awe. Her gaze held mine as though she trusted me to understand her story without a single word. I thought I'd seen loyalty in the hunters I once knew, in the bonds between men and their hounds. But this was different. This was something sacred, raw, an unspoken promise of forgiveness. And in that promise, I felt something shift inside me. Shadows stretched across the yard as afternoon surrendered to an early dusk. The cold deepened, biting at my ears and fingers, Yet I stayed rooted, entranced by her silent vigil. I felt tears freeze on my lashes, but I did not blink, unwilling to break the fragile connection forming between us. "I thought you'd just wander off," I said aloud, voice echoing on the wind. "I thought you'd leave and be gone, and that would be the end." She inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring, as if surprised I could read her mind. Then she let out a low breath, half sigh, half plea. My heart pounded in my chest, mind racing with what I should do next. But before I could move, a flake of snow landed on her muzzle, melting instantly into a glistening droplet. She lifted her head and gave me a look that shattered whatever I thought I knew about animals and their hearts. I wanted to stay, to watch her until the stars came out, but the cold began to seep into my bones. Reluctantly, I stood, staring down at her. Her tail twitched once, then settled. The promise in her eyes was clear. She would wait. I turned away, every step an agony, my chest tight with the weight of her trust. She did not move. I glanced back once more to see her silhouette framed by snow-dusted boards, still unwavering, still hopeful. But then I shook my head. I thought that was all there was to it. She was just a dog, waiting for a master who would never return. My boots crunched over the ice as I walked back home into my own warm darkness, turning the moment over in my mind. I told myself she would leave, find food, find shelter. I convinced myself the scene would haunt me for a moment, and then fade away, like the last gasp of a dying winter breeze. But back then, I did not yet know why she was waiting. That evening, when the sun dipped below the pines and the world turned a bruised purple, I saw her rise from the porch with that same slow, deliberate pace. My breath curled in the cold air as I watched her tail tuck low, then lift stiffly as she trotted toward the tree line. I thought it was just another wander, just a dog seeking scraps under the stars. I followed at a distance, boots crunching in the half-frozen grass. The forest smelled of damp pine needles and last year's leaves. She slipped between two birches and disappeared. For a long moment, I thought I'd lost her. Then I caught the faint rustle of fabric. There, beneath a leaning log, was a nest of matted cloth and straw, and tiny, shivering bodies nestled inside. My heart slammed against my ribs. 4 pups, no bigger than fist-sized stones, whined softly. Their coats were as ragged as their mother's, flecked with grime and frost. She stood sentinel at the edge of their den, eyes never leaving me. My fingers convulsed in the jacket pocket where I'd stuffed my gloves. I crept forward, and she didn't growl or bare her teeth. Instead, she dipped her head, as if to say, "They're mine. Keep your distance." Then, without a sound, she turned and vanished deeper into the woods. I waited, shivering, until the sky bruised fully into night. When I heard her whistle soft footsteps again, she had a gift, a fat rabbit, its fur still warm with life. For a moment I thought, she's hunting for the sheer thrill, until I saw her lay the carcass beside her pups, gently tugging at the cloth to arrange it like a mother tucking in children. I knelt, breath clouding around my face, and felt tears sting my eyes. This couldn't be instinct alone. It felt sacred. I wrote it off as nature's mechanics at first, but each night, without fail, she repeated the journey. One evening it was a bit of stale bread left on someone's porch. Another time, a scorched scrap of meat from a campfire pit. Each gift she carried carefully, as though she understood they were tokens of survival. And then, the real shock came. One morning, I saw her stagger back toward the village at dawn, pelvis bleeding, fur matted with brambles. She slowed at my gate, head drooping, but her eyes burned bright with purpose. She'd gotten stuck, I realized. The pups would have starved if she hadn't risked everything to feed them. I pressed my hand against the cold glass of my window and watched her lower the tiny bundle of cloth in front of my door, then limp away without looking back. My heart twisted so fiercely I felt I might pass out. I thought that was where the story ended, but nature had another plan. That very night, as a blizzard roared in, I slipped outside with a flashlight. Soft whimpers led me to the den. By then, the pups were huddled together for warmth, crying for their mother. I reached down, and they nuzzled my glove finger, cold little hearts beating against my palm. Behind me, a shadow slid from the trees. She emerged, claws crunching on the ice, and stopped 2 yards away. Our eyes met, and I swear I heard gratitude in her panting. She sat on her haunches, fur coated with snow, and let out a low, quivering sigh, half relief, half prayer. My mind reeled. Here was this abandoned dog, risking injury and starvation, returning night after night through biting cold just to keep her litter alive, and still she came back to that porch as if she believed someone would open the door. I dropped to my knees, the wind clawing at my jacket, and held out a piece of jerky I'd taken from the house. She took it gently between her teeth, then sat back and stared at me as though she recognized something in my own hungry eyes. I thought it was simple instinct driving her, but she carried it out with some sacred faith I can't explain. That night, I realized I was no longer a mere observer. I had become part of her story, bound by the same unspoken promise to protect those who depend on you, no matter the cost. And in the echo of her paw steps fading into the storm, I understood that real devotion isn't born of guarantee or reward. It's forged in the fierce will to keep faith alive, even when everyone else has given up. That afternoon, the sky was a bruised slate, and the air held a rumor of more snow to come. I'd been inside, thumbing through an old hunting magazine, when I heard a soft scraping at the door. My heart stuttered. Something made me think it was her. I crept to the window and saw, to my shock, a crust of torn bread laid carefully against the threshold. I pressed my forehead to the glass, breath fogging the pain, wondering why she would offer such a gift to the man who'd thrown her out. I slipped on my boots and opened the door, the hinges groaning in protest. Flakes drifted down as I stooped to pick up the bread, stale, half frozen, but placed with solemn intention. My fingers trembled as I traced the ragged edges. I thought this was her way of begging forgiveness for something she didn't understand, or perhaps a peace offering, even though he'd been anything but peaceful. She looked him in the eyes, and there was no hatred, only a plea to stay by her side. The words echoed in my mind like a benediction. I waited, shivering, for her to emerge from the tree line. When she appeared, her coat was streaked with mud and blood, but she carried herself with regal dignity. She watched me cradle the bread, tail wagging in small, hesitant pulses. It felt sacrilegious to intervene in her ritual. I wanted to call out, warn her he might hurt her again, but the look in her eyes stopped me. Careful as a monk laying down an offering, she padded forward and settled a few paces away, head bowed until I closed the door behind me. I propped the door ajar and whispered, "Is that enough?" She lifted her gaze to the empty window, as if expecting him to appear any moment. I thought now he would finally accept her. But then I realized acceptance wasn't what she sought. It was something deeper, a need to bridge the chasm of betrayal with an offering of trust. I felt a tear tremble on my cheek as the wind bit through my jacket. That night, under a sliver of moonlight, I followed her again. She did not flinch when I trailed her into the woodlot. I found the nest, a shape half swallowed by snow, and heard a tiny whimper. Before I could step closer, she emerged, gripped something in her jaws. My breath froze in my chest as she laid down a trembling puppy at the nest's edge, nudging it gently into the circle of ragged cloth. Then she looked back toward the house, as if daring someone to claim her child as their own. I knelt beside the den, and the pup nuzzled my glove with starvation in its bones. My throat constricted. This was no longer instinct. It was an act of sacrifice. She offered her own offspring to the very doorstep that had spat her out. The thought made me stagger backward against a pine trunk, heart pounding so fiercely I feared it might burst through my ribs. Snow began to swirl in violent spirals, and she rose, standing tall on a mound of frozen needles. My pulse thundered. I could smell the musky heat of her breath against the frosted air. She turned her head slowly, eyes fixed on the fallen pup against the harsh brightness of the snow. She watched him, protector and betrayer, and in that gaze I saw a depth of forgiveness I'd only ever imagined in fairy tales. I pictured the neighbor opening that door, finding first stale bread, then a helpless pup. Would he soften then? I thought, now he would finally accept her. But I could feel the lie of that hope shattering like thin ice underfoot. He had no inkling of what he'd done, no memory of the bond broken. She, however, remembered everything, the warmth of his hand on her coat, the lull of his voice calling her name, and still she came back with offerings. I stood in the silent forest, wind tugging at my collar, witnessing the unthinkable. Her ribs moved in a slow, determined rise and fall, a metronome of steadfast love. I pressed my palm against the rough bark as if to anchor myself to reality. Under the moon's cold glare, she let out a soft whine, not for fear or hunger, but for recognition, for justice in the court of her own heart. I slipped away before she noticed me, torn between awe and dread. Back at home, I stood by the door long after I'd locked it, imagining footprints leading to the porch, tiny paw prints pressed into the thin dusting of snow. I could almost hear the soft scrape of cloth as she arranged her gifts. My chest ached. I was part witness, part accomplice, unable to save her from her own sacrificial hope. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake thinking of that crust of bread, once worthless, now hallowed by intention, of the pup whose survival came at the cost of motherly pride, and of the neighbor's door, a silent altar to her unbreakable faith. I realized then that I'd been living in a world too small to contain such devotion. She showed me that love is boundless, that forgiveness can be as fierce as vengeance, and that sometimes the greatest gift is the willingness to give what you cannot do without. That night the wind cut through every layer of my clothes like a blade. I heard the sharp crack of the neighbor's door swinging open, then a harsh shout. Seconds later, she bolted from beneath the porch, teeth bared in panic, and he drove her off again with a roar of anger. Her body trembled as she fled into the darkness, and my heart lurched with her. I grabbed a tin bowl and a loaf of stale bread from my kitchen, bundled into my coat, and stepped outside. The moon was a thin smile in the sky. My breath turned to steam as I set the bowl on the frozen ground where she had disappeared. For a long minute, nothing moved. Then, from the tree line, she emerged, ribs sharp beneath matted fur, eyes hollow but unbroken. She approached the bowl like someone approaching a lifeline. I held my breath as she ate, each bite a desperate prayer against the cold. I thought it was over. I thought feeding her once would be enough to break her spirit. But the next morning, I found her curled around her pups in a shallow depression just beyond my fence, body wrapped around them like a living blanket. Her fur was stiff with frost, and every shiver ran through her slender frame. I watched through the window as she pressed her nose against one tiny snout, then the other, drawing their warmth into her own aching body. My chest constricted. There was something more than just maternal instinct in her. I slipped on my boots and crept closer. The pups stirred, little muffled cries in the silence. She lifted her head at my approach, eyes reflecting both fear and fierce trust. My hand hovered over the gate, trembling. I wanted to scoop her inside, to shut out the cruel night, but she stayed immobile, as if guarding something sacred. I unlocked the gate and stepped into the snow, each footfall a confession of my new allegiance. She didn't flinch. Instead, she pressed her body tighter around her litter, and I saw the lines of pain etched into her flanks. I knelt beside them, resting my palm on her back. She exhaled, a soft rasp that sounded like relief. The pups snuggled closer, and for a moment I felt tears freeze on my lashes. My mind raced. The neighbor could return at any moment and chase her off again. But I couldn't bear to leave her out there. I reached for a blanket I'd brought, and she watched as I draped it over her shivering form. She hunched under it, still protecting the pups, tail thumping weakly against the snow. When I offered more bread, she ate without trying to guard it from me. Her ribs moved in a slow, rhythmic rise and fall. I could see the tension in her jaw release, and I realized she was learning to trust me. My heart pounded so loud I was sure she could hear it. Night fell again, and I stayed by the fence until I saw her retreat into the woods. I entered the den, finding the pups huddled and surprisingly warm under the blanket. Their bodies were soft buds of life against the harsh frost. I laid more cloth around them, then backed away. Through the trees, I saw her standing guard, silhouette haloed by the moon. I thought it couldn't get any more miraculous, but as dawn broke, I witnessed her greatest act of devotion yet. A storm rolled in, wind whipping branches against one another. I trudged along the fence line, worrying about her and her babies. Then I saw her step into the open, coat soaked and white with snow, and begin to circle the den in a silent vigil. She lifted her muzzle to the sky and cried out, a sound that tore through my chest. It wasn't a howl of distress, but a call of defiance, an anthem to her stubborn hope. I reached her just as the first gust nearly knocked me off my feet. She turned, breath ragged, and stared at me. In that moment, she wasn't just a dog fighting for her pups. She was a guardian of something primal, a creature carrying the weight of unspeakable love. My throat tightened so fiercely that I could barely stand. "She won't leave," I whispered, though she could already have told me that. That evening the neighbor's door stayed shut. Instead of retreating to her porch, she led her pups into the shelter of my barn. I opened it cautiously, heart hammering. The pups toddled in, tails wagging like fragile banners. She stood at the threshold, shivering, but upright. I closed the door behind her and turned the heater on, feeling the roar of warm air like redemption. She watched me light the lamp, then laid her head on my boot. I knelt and ran my fingers through her frost-kissed fur. She leaned into my touch, eyes half-lidded in exhaustion and trust. I thought of every moment I'd witnessed, her nightly journeys, her sacrificial offerings, her unwavering faith, and realized I had become the one she believed in now. That night, as I lay awake listening to her soft snores mingled with her pups' tiny whimpers, I understood something I never thought possible. Love can transcend rejection. Devotion can withstand cruelty. And faith can bloom in the coldest, most desperate places, illuminating everything it touches with a light stronger than any storm. The night the wolves first circled the village, I heard their howls like distant thunder rolling across the fields. I was dozing by the window when a low, unsettling chorus carried on the wind. My chest tightened. I knew those weren't stray dogs. Wolves. I slipped into my boots and crept outside, lantern in hand, every breath a plume of pale fear. I followed the sound to the edge of the woods, where the trees stood like silent sentinels. Through the underbrush, I spotted her silhouette, body tense, hackles up, as she stood between her den and the looming threat. The nearest pup whimpered inside the cloth nest, but she would not back down. I watched her bare her teeth in a silent growl, fur bristling like a warrior's plume. A rustle of leaves and two gray forms emerged, eyes glinting in the lantern's beam. The wolves prowled closer, noses twitching, drawn by the scent of helpless pups. She snarled and stepped forward, body low and rigid. One wolf lunged, hackles raised, but she met it head-on, teeth flashing in the half-light. It was like watching a knight in battle armor, small but fearless, defending her castle. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure she could hear it. After a frantic standoff, the wolves retreated a few paces, circling back and forth like shadows testing her resolve. She never flinched. Every time they inched closer, she snarled louder, as if she carried within her the collective courage of all mothers. I found myself shouting, "Stay back!" though I knew neither queen of this stand would heed my voice. At dawn, she returned alone to my fence, one ear torn, fur matted with dried blood. My breath skipped a beat at the sight. She limped, body trembling, but her eyes, those dark, unwavering pearls, still burned with fierce pride. I rushed to her side, heart thundering in my ribs, but her gaze held me at bay. She would accept my help on her own terms. Inside, I cleaned her wound as best I could, whispering apologies for the violence she endured. She flinched only once, then settled, trusting me to ease her pain. I pressed a rag soaked in warm water against her flank, and she leaned into my palm, breathing ragged. I felt tears sting my eyes. She looked into my soul, and there was no doubt, only a plea to stand by her side. I thought this battle won. I thought the worst had passed. But nature had another lesson in store for me. Late that evening, I crept back to the den with extra blankets and food. The forest floor was ghostly under a full moon, but when I reached the clearing, the nest was empty. No whimpers, no shivering bodies, only a ragged circle of cloth, stained and flattened. My legs gave way beneath me. The pups were gone. Panic knotted my stomach. My mind raced. The wolves must have taken them. I pictured the small bodies trampled, or worse. I pounded my fist against a tree in helpless rage and grief. The wind whispered through the branches, but offered no answers. I stumbled back toward the village, each step an avalanche of dread. I tore through my house, searching every corner, calling their names like a madman. "Come back!" I pleaded into the night. She appeared at the gate, still limping, head low. I fell to my knees and pressed my face to her side, tears soaking her fur. For a moment, she pressed against me with all her strength, then backed away, stooped low, as if urging me to follow. My chest seized. She was leading me somewhere. I followed her stumbling steps into the dark woods, heart hammering with fresh fear for her too. The moonlight carved silver paths under the trees, and I faltered with every cold gust. She paused by a fallen log and turned, eyes glistening as if revealing a secret. My breath caught. Could she know where her pups were? Then I heard it, faint whimpers from beyond a thicket. I hacked through brambles, shrubs snapping like angry fingers at my skin, until I burst into a hidden hollow. There, huddled beneath a rocky overhang, were her pups, dirty, hungry, but alive. The smallest pup lifted its head and let out a tiny yelp of relief. She sank to her belly, tail thumping the ground in joy, and her body trembled not from fear, but from release. I knelt beside the den, stumbling over my own shock. I flung my arms around her and the pups, hugging them as snowflakes drifted in like blessings. She looked up at me, eyes shining fiercely. It wasn't instinct that brought her here. It was a sacred bond, a guide born of love stronger than any threat. My tears stained the frozen earth as I realized I'd been given a glimpse of something primal, courage that defies size, hope that outlasts danger, and faith that can navigate the darkest woods. She nudged my hand to feed her pups from my pocket, and I did, laughing through sobs. As the wolves' howls faded once more into the distance, I understood that this story wasn't just about survival. It was about the profound wisdom of the wild, teaching me that no darkness is too deep when you carry love as your compass. And in that moment, I knew I would never be the same. That night, I woke to the crunch of paws on gravel and the faintest whimper echoing down the barn aisle. My heart leapt. I thought the worst was behind us, that she'd finally found safety, but I was wrong. I swung the lantern high and saw her silhouette framed by the sagging doorway, her body low, every rib clear beneath her frost-kissed fur, and behind her, 4 tiny shapes stumbling through the straw. She had carried her pups, each one smaller than my hand, across the frozen yard and into my barn, using nothing but her gentle strength and fierce will. My breath caught in my throat as she nudged them toward the loose hay I'd scattered for warmth. I'd never seen anything so humble, so heroic. Tentatively, I set the lantern on a crate and knelt in the sawdust. My fingers shook as I reached out, expecting her to flinch, to snap, to turn away, but she didn't. She let me stroke her head, smoothed the coarse fur between her ears, and for the first time, she leaned into my touch. My palm felt the tremor in her spine, the echo of exhaustion, relief, and trust all at once. She looked at me as though she knew I was already different. I felt tears sting my eyes as the lantern's glow painted her coat in warm amber. Her pups curled around her belly, each one rising for a faint suckle before nesting back into the hay. I whispered her name, though I didn't know it, and she lifted her muzzle, touching my knuckles with her nose. In that contact, I understood something profound. She believed in me as much as I believed in her. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here, we share the truth about animals who feel more deeply than we ever imagined. I backed away to give her space, watching as she settled her pups with a mother's careful pause. The barn was quiet except for their soft whimpers and the distant howl of the wind beyond the wooden walls. I realized I'd been holding my breath, and when I exhaled, I felt lighter, like part of a weight had lifted from my chest. I stood and fetched an old blanket, draping it over her and the pups. She pressed closer to them, shivering despite the extra layer, but her eyes never left mine. I returned with a bowl of warm water and scraps of meat, laying them on a low plank. The pups stirred, and she guided each to the food, gently nudging them one by one. My voice caught in my throat as I watched her instruct them with a quiet authority I'd never attributed to a dog before. As I leaned against the barn door, I reflected on how far we'd come. Not long ago, I would have passed her by without a second thought. Now I stood here, protector and witness to a miracle made flesh and fur and bone. I felt tears warm on my cheeks, tears I welcomed because they signaled that my heart had grown. Night deepened around us, the barn's single bulb flickering as if in breath with her. When I finally moved to leave, she lifted her head and let out a low sigh, almost a sigh of contentment. Her body relaxed, the tension drained away, and for the first time, I saw peace in her expression. I shut the barn door quietly, lantern swinging by my side. Outside, the wind had died, leaving only a hush that felt respectful, almost reverent. I lingered on the porch, shoulders loose for the first time in days, and thought I'd never felt more alive. But I didn't yet know the full price of that miracle. That morning, I set out into the woods to gather firewood, unaware that the sky was already closing in around me. The first snowflakes were soft and lazy, then suddenly thick and unforgiving, whipping through the trees with a white fury. I pressed on, trusting I knew the route back, but within minutes, every landmark I recognized vanished beneath the swirling drifts. The pines became specters. The trail dissolved into a silent wasteland. Panic fluttered in my chest like a trapped bird. My boots sank ankle-deep in powder, each step more exhausting than the last. The barn, our refuge, lay somewhere behind me, but I had no sense of direction. My lantern's flame danced in the gusts, flickering out, and leaving me in a world of gray and black. I shouted her name, my voice swallowed by the storm. Memories of her bravery swelled in my mind, the nests she'd built, the pups she'd saved. I felt a fierce urgency to return, but the woods closed in like prison walls. My heart pounded so loud I thought she might hear it. I staggered off the trail, seeking any hint of familiarity, but the wind shredded each sound before it could reach my ears. Then, as I rounded a snow-drifted stump, my lantern popped and died. Darkness crashed in, and I slid to my knees, chest heaving. I thought, this is it, lost forever in nature's unforgiving cage. My fingers grew numb, and tears froze on my cheeks. I closed my eyes, bracing for despair. A bark sliced through the storm, sharp, insistent, impossibly close. My pulse soared. She was here. "Bella?" I croaked into the wind. The bark came again, a signal cutting through the white noise. I scrambled to my feet, calling as I stumbled forward. For a moment, I was blinded by the gale. Then a dark shape appeared in the swirling snow, a silhouette I knew better than any map. She pressed forward, pausing to look back, ensuring I followed. In that instant, awe washed over me. How did she find me? How did she know where to guide me? I reached out blindly and felt her warm flank against my glove. Her tail thumped once, twice, steadying me. I wrapped an arm around her neck, clinging to her as if she were a lifeline. Each step she took forged a path through the blizzard, her paws carving a trench for me to follow. She led me like a mother guiding a blind man, every cautious step, every pause to check the way, filled with unwavering care. Her breath steamed in the frigid air, and I leaned into her warmth, willing my frost-bitten fingers to circulate again. The storm battered us, but she never broke her stride. I closed my eyes, imagining a world beyond the fury, our barn's hearth, the soft whine of her pups, the promise of safety she carried on her shoulders. I prayed I could keep up. After what felt like hours, the trees thinned, and the air stilled. A faint glow appeared ahead. The lantern I'd left hanging by the barn door. Relief flooded me so completely it made me weep. The barn door's warm light beckoned through the flake-laden night. She paused at the threshold and looked back, meeting my gaze. Her eyes shone with something I can only describe as quiet triumph. I let slip a sob of gratitude, reaching down to hug her thick neck as snow drifted at our feet. She watched me for a heartbeat, then turned and stepped inside, shaking off the worst of the storm. I followed, slamming the door against the howl of the wind and dropping to my knees in the straw, exhausted and exhilarated. She nuzzled my face, sending her warm breath across my frozen cheeks. In the glow of the oil lamp, I brushed the snow from her shoulders and murmured, "I thought I'd never see you again." She woo-fed softly, then lay down beside me, her body curled protectively around my calves, as if to say, "I told you I'd never abandon you." That night, as I lit a fresh fire, I held her close, feeling her steady heartbeat against my side. I thought back on every desperate moment, the swirling storm, the pitch-black forest, my own fear, and I realized that in the darkest hour, when all hope seemed lost, she became my guide, my guardian, my way home. I whispered a promise into her fur. "I'll always follow you, just as you've followed me." And in her soft sigh, I heard the echo of a bond forged in snow and peril, a bond I would carry long after the storm passed. 2 days later, the forest felt haunted. I returned to the clearing at dawn, heart heavy with a mix of dread and hope. The snow lay undisturbed in a perfect white sheet, as if the world had held its breath. I called her name softly, "Bella?" But only the wind answered, whispering through the bare branches. I found them huddled in the shallow hollow where she'd borne them, 4 tiny bodies pressed against her side. My breath hitched, my boots crunched as I knelt. Her fur was matted with ice, eyes closed in peaceful repose. Her body was still warm, but I knew she was gone. I reached out with trembling fingers and brushed the snow from her muzzle. I wanted to believe she slept, waiting for morning, but the chill in her bones told me the truth. She'd given everything to shield her pups from the merciless cold. Tears welled so quickly I could not look away. I curled beside her, half afraid to break the fragile scene. My cheek rested against her flank. I could still feel the faint flutter of her heart's last rhythm echoing in my own chest. My sobs caught in my throat as I pressed my forehead to her spine, and the world narrowed to the sound of my grieving. "I thought we made it," I whispered, voice cracking. "I thought you'd survive for them, for me." Her litter stirred at the edges, small snuffles echoing like desperate prayers. One pup lifted its head, blinking large eyes at the pale sky. I reached out a hand, and it crawled toward me, guided by instinct. It nuzzled my palm, then looked up at the lifeless form beside it. My tears blurred the world as I realized what she'd done. She had lain down in the snow, her body a shield of warmth around those fragile lives, refusing to move until the last heartbeat escaped her. She traded her own survival for theirs, an act of devotion too immense for words. I sat back on my heels, chest tightening. I remembered how she'd carried them here, one by one, through storms and threats. I remembered how she'd taught me compassion, hope, faith, and now she lay still, a martyr to a bond only a mother could know. A chill gust swept across the clearing, lifting flurries of snow. I gathered her pups in my arms, pressing them to my chest. They trembled, tiny lives shivering against the cold edge of mortality. I wrapped them in my scarf and stood, heart pounding so fiercely I feared it would burst free. I lifted her head gently and spoke to the silent forest, to the cruel neighbor's empty door, to everything and nothing. She forgave them all, even those who didn't deserve it. Forgave them, and she left. A strangled sob tore from my throat. I sank to my knees, cradling her pups like sacred relics. The sun rose weakly over the trees, painting the snow in pale gold. In that quiet light, I could almost see her reach out one last time, guiding them into a future she would never know. I found myself whispering apologies into the still air. Sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry I couldn't stop the cold. Sorry I didn't understand sooner. But forgiveness, I realized, was her gift to the world, her final lesson. She'd shown me how to love beyond fear, how to believe when all seemed lost. Behind me, a soft rustle made me look up. One pup, the smallest of the litter, had wriggled free from my scarf and now stood at my feet. It tilted its head and met my gaze with those deep, knowing eyes. My chest constricted. It was the same look I'd seen in her eyes so many times. A plea to believe, a promise that life endures. I knelt and held out my hand. The pup stepped forward, pressing its warm nose against my palm. A shiver ran through me, not from the cold, but from awe. In that moment, I felt her presence, her spirit alive in this fragile creature who had refused to stay hidden. I scooped it up, cradling it against my heart as the other pups stirred in the scarf. The smallest one nestled against me, and I whispered into its fur, "You are her miracle." My tears fell freely now, but they felt like release, like baptism into a world made larger by her sacrifice. I tucked the pups into my coat and made my way back through the trees, every step a vow. I would give them life and love, everything she couldn't, and I would tell her story to anyone who would listen, so the world would know what true devotion looks like. As I emerged into the clearing by my barn, I paused and looked back at the spot where she lay. A single ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the snow with a soft glow, as if blessing her rest. I whispered, "Goodbye, brave heart," before turning to the future she had secured. I understood then that her legacy was not grief, but hope. She had forgiven cruelty with kindness, battered the storm with courage, and showed me that love can transcend even death. If your heart is full of awe right now, write, "Nature is wiser than us." If you too believe that animals remember kindness, right, we are not alone in this world. When I heard a faint cry deep in the woods, my heart skipped a beat because I knew that sound wasn't just an accident. At first, I thought it was the wind twisting through the branches, the kind of lonely whistle that makes you pull your jacket tighter and keep walking. But then it came again, soft, sharp, and so full of need it stopped me cold. I stood there, listening. The forest was still, no birds, no rustle of leaves, just that tiny, broken sound. My boots sank into the damp earth as I turned, scanning the trees. I don't know why my chest felt so tight. It was just a sound, right? And then I saw it. Pressed against the gnarled roots of a fallen oak was a small gray shape, shaking so hard it barely looked alive. A kitten, out here, in the middle of nowhere. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. There were no houses for miles, no trails except the one I'd taken. How had it survived this far in? I crouched slowly, like any sudden move might shatter it. Its fur was matted, clinging to its tiny frame, and its eyes, God, those eyes, they were too big for its face, glassy and wet, locked on mine like I was the first human it had ever seen. Hey, little one," I whispered, because it felt wrong to speak loud in that silence. It didn't move, didn't hiss, didn't even flinch, just stared at me with this desperate stillness, like it had run out of ways to fight and was waiting for something, anything to happen. I held out my hand, expecting it to bolt the second I came close, but it didn't. When my fingers brushed its fur, it made this sound, not a meow, not even a cry, just a breath, like relief. And then, when I stood up, it did something that broke me. It tried to follow. Its tiny paws dragged through the mud, wobbling, weak, but it kept coming. I took a step back, and it pressed against my boot, clinging like I was the last solid thing in its world. I swear to you, in that moment, something inside me shifted. I'd come out here to clear my head, to be alone. I wasn't looking for anything, least of all this fragile life staring up at me like I was its only chance. What was I supposed to do? Leave it? Walk away and pretend I never heard that cry? Number not after those eyes. I scooped it up, feeling bones under fur, the faint thud of a racing heart against my palm. It was so light, it didn't even feel real. And yet, holding it, I felt this strange weight settle on me, like the forest had handed me a secret. As I started back toward the trail, the kitten curled against my chest and let out the tiniest sigh, like it had been holding its breath for days. And I thought, that's it. That's the story. A lost kitten, a random act of kindness, and now we both get to go home. If only I had known. That was the beginning of something I can't explain to this day. When I got home, I didn't even know where to start. A kitten in the forest. How does that happen? I thought maybe someone nearby was missing it, so I put up flyers, called shelters, even asked neighbors. Days passed. Nothing. No one came forward. The little thing stayed with me, curled up in a worn-out box lined with an old sweater. At first, it seemed like any other scared, abandoned animal. But soon, the kitten started doing things that made me wonder if I was losing my mind. At night, it would wake me up, not just with the usual meowing or scratching, but by staring, fixated, at the window, eyes wide, unblinking, as if waiting for something that I couldn't see. I'd lie there, heart pounding, watching it sit perfectly still, almost like a guardian keeping watch over some secret. I started noticing things about those eyes. They weren't kitten's eyes. They were too knowing, too deep. One night, I remember it so clearly, I sat up in bed and whispered, "What are you waiting for?" The kitten didn't blink. It just stared into the darkness beyond the glass, and I felt like I was looking at something ancient, something that had seen things no human could ever understand. I tried to shake it off as imagination. I told myself maybe the kitten was just scared, or maybe I was exhausted and reading too much into it. But every night, the same ritual, the same silence, the same stare. It followed me everywhere during the day, clinging to my legs, rubbing its head against me like it was trying to say, "Don't forget." And then came the seventh night. I thought maybe I was just overthinking everything. Maybe the kitten was just a lost little soul needing comfort. And that was the whole story. But the seventh night changed everything. That night, the silence in the house was different, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. The kitten got up from its bed, walked to the window, and sat down as usual. But this time, I saw something I'd never seen before. Its eyes reflected a light, not from inside the room, but from deep outside. A glow that wasn't from any street lamp or passing car. Something wild, something alive. For a moment, I could have sworn the kitten's gaze pierced through the glass, through the darkness, right into my soul, and I felt it, the impossible truth settling like a stone in my chest. This little creature wasn't just lost, it was waiting for something, someone. If only I had known then what was coming. The morning light spilled weakly through my bedroom window, soft and pale, like the world was still waking up. But when I reached out to the spot where the kitten usually slept, curled up tight, it was empty. Gone. Panic slammed into me harder than I expected. I called its name, heart racing, shaking the blankets aside like a man desperate for a lifeline. The house was silent, too silent. I ran outside, into the cool morning air, and called again. No answer, no rustle. No sign of anything but the faint smell of damp earth and pine. I searched everywhere, the garden, the porch, under the bushes, but it was like the kitten had vanished into thin air. The fear clawed at my throat. How could something so small disappear without a trace? I knew the forest was close by. I hesitated, but the silence in the house was worse than the unknown out there. So I stepped onto the familiar trail, calling softly. Branches snapped underfoot. The morning mist clung to the trees like a secret. My voice echoed, but no kitten answered. Then I heard it. Low, deep growls rolling through the shadows like thunder wrapped in velvet. My breath caught. I froze. The hairs on my neck stood up like a warning. I thought of turning back, running home where it was safe. But something, maybe the memory of those knowing eyes, made me keep moving forward. I followed the sound, heart hammering, until the trees opened into a small clearing. And there it was, the kitten, sitting calmly, not an ounce of fear in its body. But it wasn't alone. Behind it, just beyond the edge of the trees, a massive shape loomed, enormous, dark, almost unreal in the early dawn light. I blinked, trying to process what I was seeing. The growls came from this creature, a cougar, its fur mottled and thick, its eyes glowing faintly in the shadows. The kitten looked up at me, then back at the cougar. It didn't flinch, didn't move away. It sat there like the king of this wild kingdom, fearless and sure. And in that moment, I understood. It wasn't lost, it wasn't scared, it was leading me. This wasn't a random rescue. It was a message, a connection that stretched far beyond anything I had ever believed possible. I swallowed hard, feeling something shift inside me, a mixture of fear, awe, and an overwhelming sense that I had stepped into a story much bigger than myself. My legs felt like they were filled with lead, but I forced myself forward, each step shaking with a mixture of fear and something I couldn't quite name. My heart hammered in my chest, loud enough to drown out the low growls that echoed through the trees. The cougar was massive, far bigger than I'd imagined from a distance. Its coat was mottled with dirt and blood, and one of its front legs hung awkwardly, clearly wounded. It limped slightly, eyes sharp but tired. The kitten moved toward the cougar without hesitation, weaving through the tall grass and rubbing its tiny head gently against the cougar's face like it was family, not prey, not plaything, but kin. I expected a roar or a swipe, some sign that I was an intruder, a threat. But there was nothing. The cougar didn't attack. It watched me, steady and calm, as if it understood I was part of something larger, as if it recognized me. In that moment, my fear twisted into awe. This was no ordinary wild beast. There was something sacred in the way it let me approach, in the way it tolerated my trembling hands reaching out, hesitant to touch. If a predator, fierce, powerful, untamed, could show gratitude and trust, what excuse did we humans have? I knelt down slowly beside them, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. The wound was bad, raw and angry, but the cougar's eyes held a quiet acceptance, like it knew I was here to help. I thought maybe, after all this, it would just let me go, that I could turn around, walk back through the forest, and leave this impossible encounter behind. But no, something bigger was coming. A silence settled, thick and deep, like the forest itself was waiting for what would happen next. And I realized this was far from over. The cougar's limp was worse than I'd first thought. Every step it took was a silent struggle, muscles tense, breathing shallow. It moved with pain, but it didn't run. It stayed. The kitten kept looking at me, those eyes full of something urgent, almost pleading, like it was asking me to choose, to stay or to leave. I could feel my own fear rising. Run. Get out while you still can. This is a wild animal, a predator. What if it turns on me? What if I make it worse? But then I looked into those deep, patient eyes of the cougar, and I knew I couldn't walk away. I dropped to my knees beside it, hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the cloth I'd found in my backpack. For hours, I worked quietly, cleaning the wound as best as I could. The smell of earth and blood filled my nostrils. I talked to it softly, not knowing if it understood my words, but hoping the calm in my voice would reach it. Every time I looked up, the cougar was watching me, steady, unflinching. It trusted me more than I trusted myself. I thought that had to be the miracle, the moment when everything changed, when a wild, fierce creature put its fate in the hands of a stranger. I felt tears burn behind my eyes, and for a moment, I dared to believe that maybe I was part of something sacred. But nature wasn't done with me yet. There was more to see, more to understand, and the story I thought I knew was only just beginning. I was halfway through cleaning the wound when I heard it, a heavy rustling, like thunder in the trees. My heart seized. Out of the shadows stepped another cougar, bigger, broader. Its fur was darker, muscles rippling under the morning light, eyes like molten gold locked onto me with a gaze so fierce I thought I'd freeze forever. I couldn't move, my breath caught in my throat. Every instinct screamed, run, hide, survive, but my body stayed rooted, trapped by fear and awe. The second cougar didn't growl or charge. It just stood there, silent and still, watching me as if weighing my soul. And then something unbelievable happened. The kitten, fearless as ever, slipped between the two massive beasts, weaving like a tiny ambassador of peace. It rubbed against their legs, purred softly, and for a moment, the tension in the clearing dissolved. I realized then, this wasn't chance. This was something deeper, something I couldn't control. In that moment, I understood. I was part of their story now. A thread woven into the wild fabric of their lives, a witness to something sacred and raw. I thought maybe this was it. Maybe the cougars would turn and disappear back into the forest, leaving me stunned but safe. But no, something shifted in the air. The second cougar stepped forward, brushing past me, its breath warm and steady. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from fear, but from a strange, overwhelming sense of connection. Nature had chosen to speak to me in a language I almost understood, and I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this night would change me forever. The forest seemed to hold its breath as the two cougars didn't turn away. Instead, they began to move, slow, deliberate steps into the thickening woods. The kitten darted ahead like a guide, fearless and sure. My legs trembled, but I followed, heart pounding in a mix of fear and something like wonder. I wasn't sure what I was doing out here, walking side by side with wild predators, but it felt as if I had no choice. The trees grew denser, the shadows longer. Every sound, the crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves, felt amplified. Yet the cougars moved with quiet confidence, as if this path was theirs alone. I kept my distance, but they made no move to chase me away. The kitten glanced back, then forward again, its tiny form weaving through the forest like a silent herald. After what felt like an eternity, we reached a clearing hidden beneath the thick canopy, and there, nestled in a bed of moss and leaves, were the cubs, newborns, fragile and blind, sleeping peacefully beneath the watchful eyes of their mother. I dropped to my knees, the rawness of the moment washing over me like cold water. Life so pure, so vulnerable, it struck a chord deeper than I could have imagined. The cougars didn't seem to mind my presence, their fierce protectiveness softened by a quiet trust. I looked down at those tiny creatures, and tears welled in my eyes, not just for their innocence, but because the wild had trusted me with its most sacred secret, a secret so fragile, so profound, it changed everything I thought I knew about nature and about myself. The moment felt suspended in time. The cougars melted back into the shadows of the forest, moving silently as if they were part of the mist itself. The great male and the injured female vanished between the trees without a sound. But the kitten stayed. It turned once, its eyes locking with mine, clear, unafraid, filled with a quiet understanding that reached deeper than words ever could. It was a farewell, but not a goodbye. The tiny creature gave a last gentle glance, then disappeared with a sudden burst of energy, darting into the thick woods and vanishing from sight. I stood there, frozen. The silence wrapped around me like a heavy cloak. The journey back felt endless. Each step echoed in my bones. My hands trembled, my breath was shallow, and my mind raced with the impossible truth I had just lived through. I was alone again, but nothing was the same. The forest no longer felt like a place to escape to. It was a living, breathing world filled with secrets, kindness, and fierce protectors that I had never imagined. I swear on my life, if someone told me this story, I wouldn't believe them. But I saw it. I was there, and I will never see the world the same way again. Sometimes words hit harder than fists, and that day, nature spoke louder than any scream. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Follow for more true stories. Nature doesn't want you to forget. If you've ever seen a miracle in the wild, write, "Nature never forgets," because after what I saw, I believe it.